Joining us now, live from Cairo. I'm live in Doha, Qatar. From Cairo, Egypt, Eddie Yeranian. Eddie, it's like we're neighbors.
It's indeed an unusual development. I feel that we've become much closer in reality.
Well, here's the good news. For the first time in a long time, we're on the same time zone, right?
Well, we're generally on the same wavelength on most things, so we're on the same time zone as well.
We're in the same time zone. And doing my show from when I do it from either London, which is 5 or 6 hours ahead. But when you do it here in the Middle East, it's 8 hours ahead. So it's actually, I get on at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, our time, instead of 6 a.m. And it's a lot different doing it in the afternoon because, you're up and you got time, and it's not like you're getting up at 3:30 a.m. You actually get a good night's sleep. So I get to learn how the other half of the world lives that isn't getting up at 3:35 a.m. every day. Edward, there's a lot of developments to go over. I just want to start with, I want the reaction in Egypt right now. I want Egypt's reaction to the complete falling of Mohammed bin Salman, right? He goes to the G20. Nobody meets with him. Nobody shakes his hand. Trump ignored him. He's an ally. I mean, he's part of the blockade. I mean, what is Egypt's position now? Can they really see going forward with this guy?
I think Egypt has maintained its relations with Saudi Arabia. I think Egypt has had strong historic relations, regardless of who is on the throne. Egypt had good relations with King Abdullah before King Salman came to power, with King Fahd before King Abdullah. And I think it goes back all the way to King Abdulaziz. I don't think it's a personal thing. I think it's relations. Egypt we don't quite share a border, but we share. Egypt and Saudi Arabia are on the other side of the Red Sea, and at the very top of the Red Sea, that's quite close. And there are a lot of economic projects that the Crown Prince and Egypt were working on to put together, which would help Egypt economically. So I don't think that the situation over Jamal Khashoggi has affected the relation with Egypt for economic reasons as well as historic ties.
So basically, President Corsi is taking the same position as Trump is on Saudi Arabia, that it really doesn't matter that these leaders come and go, Mohammed bin Salman, whatever, he's there today, gone tomorrow, if the father or the other leaders decide that he's too much of a liability, and that they want to just simply go forward with the overall strategic alliance they have with the Saudis, right?
Well, de Gaulle said, country leaders change, but national interests remain the same. I think that's the viewpoint here in Cairo as well. And Egypt has a lot of workers in Saudi Arabia. Egypt has a lot of economic, benefit coming out of Saudi Arabia. I couldn't imagine them breaking with Saudi Arabia. Qatar is a much smaller country, and Qatar has fewer trade, benefits for Egypt. I mean, Qatari natural gas, liquid natural gas, does go through the canal. Qatar does have some projects with Egypt, but I think the Saudi ties outweigh the Qatari ties.
The main Qatari tie that the U.S. has, and there's many, right? That's why I think the U.S. position is they would like this blockade to get resolved, and for the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, to get back together and kind of end the blockade, which is not really hurting the Qatari economy. The people I talk to actually think they're better off. There's more products on the shelves and prices are down and their GDP is up. So they actually are now thinking that the trade they were doing with the Gulf countries was actually a drag on their economy because many of the products they got were not that great and they were overpriced, and they simply wanted to do business with the other Gulf countries that they're not doing now. So they've opened competition up. But getting back to the Egypt situation, so the Egyptians basically see their relationship with the Saudis as not going anywhere. And I think that's the right thing to do. That's why I agree with the president. Now, let's get to the Yemeni civil war, where November has been the deadliest month in 24 months. 3,000 Yemenis are dead now in November, killed by the Emirates Saudis' bombing raids, yet they're trying to go to the peace table. And Edward, I believe the U.S. Senate, I believe they've got 2/3. I believe they're going to get the U.S. out of this war. Then what, right? Because basically the Saudis can't fly an airplane without us.
Well, I was covering the peace talks in Sweden, and it's mostly the Houthies who are not being flexible at the bargaining table. And if you suddenly change the equation by, for instance, pulling U.S. support, yanking U.S. support for Saudi Arabia, what you're doing is strengthening the Houthis on the ground, which is going to basically reinforce their position and leave the country divided. Now, I think some analysts would like to see the country divided rather than a united Yemen. But I don't think that's going to resolve the humanitarian situation, because the reason many people are starving, many children and whomever else is starving, is because you have battle lines that divide territories, and aid is not crossing between the Houthi side and the Hadi government side. So I don't think the U.S. yanking support for Saudi Arabia is really going to change much.
I agree with that. If you follow this, the famine is really being caused in a lot, as you say, in the great part by the Houthis. But I want to get back to your coverage. That's one of the reasons I want to have you on today. I know that you covered the peace talks this past weekend in Sweden, and the negotiators were saying publicly on various news networks that a lot of progress had not been made, and even I understand the Yemeni government wanted to not even participate in the meeting because they said the Houthis hadn't sent any of their senior people. Is that true or false?
Mostly their backbench that they sent, but I mean they did send a couple people. Mohammed Bakhit, I believe, is still there. But anyway, I think the issue at this point is that they're not willing to budge on the central key points that the other side would like to see them budge on, which is the port of Hodeida on the Red Sea. Mm-hmm. The UN would like to administer it since it's providing, goods and services, commercial goods, aid goods, humanitarian goods to much of the country, not just the Houthis in Sana'a. And also they would like to see, of course, the Houthis would like to see the airport in Sana'a reopen, but that's contingent on them allowing their planes to be searched so that they don't bring in weapons and fighters or people who are helping them from the outside.
So if the U.S. can muster, if Congress can muster 2/3 of vote in both chambers, that is going to legally end our involvement in supporting the Saudis-Emirates coalition in the Yemeni civil war. Now, I think they're going to get there because I don't believe the president is going to utilize a lot of his political chips in order to stay there, because I don't think he wanted to be there to start with. So I don't think he's going to be lobbying people. And I think they're going to get the 2/3 vote over Khashoggi. So when that happens, what becomes of that war then? Because, as I said, Edward, the Saudis can't put an airplane in the sky. What happens?
I'm not really sure. They've said they could. They said they can refuel their planes on their own. I'm not sure that's true or not, but they've said that. I think worst-case scenario is the country will just remain divided, and it will probably divide in three ways, since the Saudi coalition controls the east of the country, and the southern Yemeni separatists would like to control the south, which is Aden and the coastline. So I think we're going to end up with another Libya with the country divided in three ways. I mean, Libya is basically three states, the south, which is pretty lawless, and then Benghazi, and then Tripoli. So I think that's what's going to happen if the U.S. Senate votes to pull out, and it's the worst case scenario, really, because it's not going to stop the war.
Mm-hmm.
If the tribes oppose each other, so
yes.
It doesn't look good.
No, look, this thing has been a disaster from day one, and it's just another Mohammed bin Salman incompetent catastrophe because, he spent billions of dollars there in this war trying to stop the Iranians and the Houthis, backed by the Iranians, Edward, and had Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman simply gone to the Yemeni government and offered half that money in just infrastructure, roads, and things of that nature, they would have self-driven out the Houthis. So, it's like everything this guy does has been a disaster. Like, he's got the reverse Midas touch. He touches it, it turns to crap. I just can't imagine how long the other Saudi officials are going to stay with this guy. I know his father has some throes of dementia and maybe can't make a decision on it. But, after a while, any sovereign government has to say, look, this leader we have just is a drag on us. I can't imagine him staying in power. But on the other hand, he's put half of his detractors in prison. So I guess there's nobody to challenge him, right?
Well, it's also a Bedouin society. When you swear a oath of loyalty to someone, you basically stick to it. It's not something you see maybe in the Senate or Congress, but these people have sworn an oath of loyalty, and for the lesser upper echelon princes and people from the regions, ordinary subjects, that's much stronger than any sort of political loyalty between Republicans and Democrats. And I think that's one thing that the analysts don't understand. A lot of these people are very unlikely to dump the crown prince, and a lot of them actually, they love him. I don't want to overdo that, but in a Bedouin society, it's not what you do to your opponents and your enemies. It's your relation with the person. It's your Bedouin superior. So, I doubt they're going to ditch the crown prince.
So explain the oath of loyalty so we all understand that, because I think you're right. That's not really understood in the Western media.
Well, when someone comes to power, when the crown prince became crown prince, there was a very important ceremony where all the important regional officials, people in the royal family, the former crown prince came before the television cameras and kissed his hand. Even the former crown prince, Mohammed bin Nayef, who lost his position, kneeled and kissed the crown prince's, Mohammed bin Salman's, hand, which is a way of saying, you defeated me, but now I am loyal to you. Perhaps he isn't internally. Perhaps many of these other people are not internally. But I think the majority are, because in the old days when they were in the desert, your survival depended on your loyalty to your group leader. And the group leader, in your kingdom, the Saudi royal family comes from the kingdom of Najd in the north, as opposed to Hejaz in the south. But they're all loyal to their leaders, just like King Hussein, who's from Hejaz. His family is from Hejaz. They were the Sharifs of Hejaz, and their subjects were loyal to them. It's no matter what ill they cause. I think it's a tribal sort of thing. It's something you have to understand by being there or being in the Middle East. I think.
Well, that's helpful. That's why we have you on, because from the Western media like myself that covers it, that's one of the reasons why I make trips around the world, so you can get a better understanding, to explain it to your audience better, that you can't do just sitting in your studio with staff bringing you the newspaper and hot chocolate with whipped cream in it. You have to get out and try to understand the other cultures, how they think, what the people are saying. But you say that. So based on what you're saying, this idea that the Saudi government, whatever that is now, the monarch is somewhere, that, King Solomon would say, well, my son just isn't up to task, I'm going to replace him. What you're saying is understanding Saudi culture and the government, how it works, that is an unlikely situation, right?
Very much so. I can't imagine that happening.
All right. Edward Yeranian, as always, we thank you for your input. I feel like we're neighbors now. We're in the same time zone. We'll get to see each other soon. But my advice to you is don't go into any Saudi consulates anytime in the near future.
Take care, John.